Picture this, a tense highway on a sweltering afternoon, a lone driver waiting inside his car as flashing blue lights illuminate the rearview mirror. Everything slows down, the heat, the seconds ticking by, the pounding in one's chest. From the outside, it appears to be just another traffic stop, but behind the wheel sits Desmond Walker, a man whose calm exterior conceals a lifetime of trials and triumphs. The officer approaching his window is about to face an unexpected awakening, a moment that will ripple far beyond this single afternoon. Brace yourselves for a story of courage, confrontation, and astonishing consequences. Desmond Walker was born in Chesapeake, Virginia, a place where the tangy smell of the Elizabeth River combined with the soft chirping of seagulls to create a sense of both adventure and familiarity. Chesapeake had a patchwork quality, a mix of industry, military presence, and ancient marshlands whispering of hidden possibilities. Desmond's father had worked at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, repairing vessels that journeyed across the globe. His mother had been a nurse at Chesapeake Regional Medical Center, spending countless nights bandaging wounds and comforting the frightened. Growing up in a home deeply shaped by the steadfast ethic of service, Desmond learned early on that there was a vast difference between existing and truly living. His father had taught him the importance of self-discipline, while his mother had shown him the significance of empathy. Looking back, Desmond could see that these values were the blueprint for who he would eventually become. His fascination with the military came as no surprise. Each evening, after finishing his homework, he would sneak into his father's study and gaze at the old photographs, black and white pictures of proud sailors and stoic Marines. One image in particular captured his imagination: a group of Navy men on the deck of the massive USS Carl Vinson, eyes shining with grit and determination. Something about their posture, the underlying conviction in their expressions, resonated with him. By the time he turned 13, his dream had taken shape. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, but more than that, he wanted to push himself to the pinnacle of naval warfare. He learned of the elite nature of the Navy SEALs stories whispered among the boldest sailors who had tried and failed to qualify. By high school, he was certain he would become a Navy SEAL, no matter how impossible it seemed. High school was a testing ground. Teachers would commend him for his resilience and consistent excellence, though some classmates, either intimidated or prejudiced, sought to tear him down. Desmond was no stranger to the subtle racism that pervaded certain circles. Classmates who assumed he didn't belong in honors classes, or strangers who questioned his presence in advanced sports programs. Yet, adversity became the fuel for his aspirations. He took up wrestling, track, and cross-country, pushing his body to extremes until the world blurred around him. At 5 in the morning, while his peers slept comfortably in their beds, Desmond was already out for a pre-dawn run, shadowboxing with the first rays of sunlight. His single-minded determination turned his body into a well-tuned machine, and his mind grew ever more disciplined. Upon graduating, he wasted no time enlisting in the Navy. Boot camp was punishing, but it was only a stepping stone. His ultimate challenge lay in Bud S. basic underwater demolition SEAL training. Held at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in San Diego, Bud S. was notorious for its ferocity. Over the course of those grinding weeks, he lost count of how many men, some bigger, some faster, some more confident, rang the fabled bell 3 times, signaling they had given up. But Desmond endured. In one particularly harrowing evolution, he remembered being submerged in the icy Pacific waters, heavy sand weighing him down, lungs protesting for oxygen. Many around him struggled in panic, some succumbing to the relentless roar of the ocean. In that dark, frigid moment, Desmond clung to a mantra: mind over matter. He had survived the riptides of prejudice and doubt his entire life. An ocean wave wasn't going to claim him now. Against staggering odds, he made it through Bud S. He faced further specialized training SEAL, qualification training, parachute school, advanced diving courses, developing an unshakable bond with the men who stood beside him. The day he finally received his SEAL trident pinned on his uniform, Desmond felt not so much pride as he did vindication. He had proven that unwavering will could propel a person beyond barriers others considered unbreakable. Desmond's first operational deployment was to a volatile region of the Middle East. His team specialized in high-risk missions that required stealth, precision, and razor-sharp intuition. Many were night operations, slipping behind lines to conduct reconnaissance, rescue hostages, or take out targets critical to U.S. national security. Regardless of the mission parameters, Desmond led with an unflappable spirit. His superiors noticed not just his tactical brilliance, but also his ability to maintain calm amidst chaos. Over time, that combination earned him a reputation as a reliable operator and natural leader. The day he was promoted to Chief Petty Officer was both a validation of his capabilities and a precursor of greater responsibility. Off-duty, however, he had a quieter side. He learned to value every moment of peace. Sitting in a dingy tent under the scorching desert sun, he would draw in a small sketchbook, an artistic hobby he'd inherited from his mother. In the churn of war and violence, those personal sketches offered a moment of serenity, tiny reflections of the calm seas he longed to sail again. Occasionally, he encountered prejudice even within the ranks. Not every attitude in the military was progressive, and he noticed the stereotypes lingering in corners. Still, he earned respect the old-fashioned way by proving himself in the field, upholding the values of brotherhood that the SEAL teams preached. Those who doubted him initially found themselves in awe of his unwavering commitment and incomparable skill. He served multiple tours, returned with scars both visible and invisible, and found new motivation in each triumph and each tragedy. With every mission, he reconnected with the vow he made as a teenager: excel not just for myself, but for those who came before me and for those who never had the chance. The day that changed his life, a stark example of how a single moment can redefine everything, was an unassuming Tuesday. Desmond had just finished a stint of intense training exercises at Naval Base Coronado. He was set to head home to Chesapeake for a brief family visit before shipping out again. He was traveling across the country, planning to make stops to see friends from Bud S, who were scattered between bases. An old friend, Troy Caldwell, who had left the SEALs after an injury, was living in Memphis, and Desmond had promised him a quick visit. So, he rented a car from the airport, wanting the freedom of a cross-country road trip rather than the convenience of a plane ride. Driving along a remote stretch of highway in a Midwestern state, he kept himself awake by replaying mental drills and listening to old R&B tracks on the radio. The farmland rolled out in every direction under a huge open sky. Occasionally, another car would dart by, but for the most part, he was alone on that lonely stretch. By late afternoon, the summer sun bore down mercilessly, and he felt the dryness in his throat. Spotting a small roadside diner ahead, he decided to grab a quick meal and some water. The diner, called Wilson's Home-Style Kitchen, was a mom-and-pop place that looked like it hadn't changed its decor since the early 1970s. The sign was chipped, the paint peeled on the front steps, but as soon as he walked in, the smell of fresh pie and sizzling burgers greeted him. He sat in a booth, casually scanning the laminated menu. Despite the warm aroma, he noted a few stares from the locals. Dressed casually in jeans and a fitted T-shirt, he didn't have any obvious military identifiers on him, and he thought that perhaps he simply looked out of place, someone from out of town, a stranger with an unfamiliar face. He tried not to let it bother him. He'd grown accustomed to occasional stares in small towns. It reminded him of childhood travels, when his parents would drive through areas where diversity was still a novelty. The waitress came over, gave him a polite nod, and took his order for a cheeseburger and a sweet tea. After a short meal, Desmond paid his check, left a tip, and stepped back into the stifling heat. That's when he noticed a county sheriff's cruiser parked near his car. The deputy inside eyed him over the brim of his shades. Desmond felt the uneasy prickling at the back of his neck, but shrugged it off. He had nothing to hide. Within minutes of pulling out onto the road again, his rear-view mirror lit up with swirling blue and red lights. The siren wailed, and he obediently pulled over, heart steady from years of disciplined breathing. The officer who approached was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a crisp brown uniform with an array of shining badges on his chest. His name tag read Officer Brad Miller. His gait conveyed a certain aggression, like he was ready for a confrontation before a word was even exchanged. Desmond rolled his window down, rummaged for his driver's license, proof of insurance, and rental paperwork. But the first words out of Officer Miller's mouth were not a polite greeting or explanation. "What are you doing around here?" the officer barked. Desmond remained calm. "Driving through, sir. Headed to Memphis." Miller's eyes narrowed. "License and registration." Desmond handed over the documents, noting the officer's curt manner. He tried to maintain eye contact, keep his posture neutral, and exude the calm he learned through countless high-stress missions. Miller studied the documents before eyeing Desmond again. "Your rental's from San Diego." "Yes, sir. I'm in the Navy, stationed in Coronado." The officer's lip twisted slightly. "Is that so?" Desmond nodded, deciding not to elaborate just yet. He had no reason to lie, but explaining that he was a Navy SEAL could sometimes raise a host of questions or prejudices. Without further explanation, Miller ordered Desmond out of the car. The demand set alarm bells ringing in Desmond's mind, but he had no intention of escalating anything. He had encountered security checkpoints all around the world. Sometimes compliance was the quickest way to dissolve suspicion. As soon as he stepped out, the officer motioned for him to walk to the shoulder of the highway. The sun beat down mercilessly, and hot tar shimmered on the asphalt. Cars slowed as they passed, their drivers rubbernecking the scene. "You got any weapons on you?" Miller asked. Desmond shook his head. "No, sir. Only my phone and my wallet." Miller circled him, eyes flicking over the fit of Desmond's shirt and the broadness of his shoulders. Then he asked a series of probing questions, each one delivered with thinly veiled hostility. "Where exactly in San Diego do you live? What's your commanding officer's name? Why are you traveling by car and not by plane? And what's a big-shot Navy boy doing in my county?" Desmond answered courteously, though he could feel the tension rising. The officer seemed uninterested in any explanation, continuously searching for something, any minor slip-up that would justify suspicion. At that moment, a second cruiser arrived, and another officer stepped out, younger but similarly tense. They spoke briefly, and Desmond caught words like possible drug courier and trafficking route. A flush of anger and dismay rose in him, though he kept it tightly in check. He'd seen this pattern before, a random traffic stop morphing into baseless accusations. He silently recalled that he had done nothing wrong. The fact that he was African American in a predominantly white rural area undoubtedly fed into the officer's assumptions. The younger officer asked to search the vehicle. Although Desmond knew he had every legal right to refuse without probable cause, he also knew from experience that refusal would probably make the situation worse. Besides, he had nothing to hide. He calmly gave them permission to look inside. While they rummaged through his trunk, glove compartment, and under the seats, Officer Miller kept a watchful eye on Desmond. It was a surreal moment. Here he stood, a decorated Navy SEAL who had risked his life for his country on multiple deployments, while a suspicious cop treated him like a criminal. The search turned up nothing but a duffel bag with neatly folded clothes, some personal items, and a pair of running shoes. The second officer shrugged at Miller, signaling they'd found nothing. Miller's jaw tightened in frustration. Rather than admit error, Miller pressed on. "Mind telling me what your job is in the Navy exactly?" Desmond decided honesty was the best route. "I'm with the SEAL teams, sir." That took Miller aback for a moment. Desmond saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes before a sneer replaced it. "Yeah, right. That's the next big lie. You got any proof?" Desmond's patience was wearing thin, but he maintained composure. "My military ID is in my wallet." Miller snatched the wallet, inspected the ID, and then handed it back with a scoff. "Even if you are in the Navy, doesn't mean you're not up to something illegal." Traffic whizzed by. A truck driver leaned out his window, shook his head at the sight, and sped on. Desmond stood in the oppressive sunlight, feeling the weight of each excruciating second. He mentally recalled the constitutional rights that every American has during a traffic stop, but the last thing he wanted was a confrontation. He was aware that no matter how correct he might be, in a tense situation with armed officers, logic sometimes had no place. Miller turned to the younger officer, radio in his info. "Let's see if he's got any outstanding warrants." Desmond could feel sweat trickling down his forehead. He wasn't worried about a warrant. He knew his record was spotless. But the sense of being hunted instead of protected unsettled him. In his numerous tours overseas, he had operated under the presumption that he was fighting to safeguard freedoms, including the very ones that now felt threatened on this American highway. Several minutes of silent radio chatter followed. The younger officer walked back, shaking his head. Clean. No warrants, no priors, no nothing. Miller's posture stiffened. "So you say you're headed to Memphis?" "Yes, to visit a friend." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Mind if I call your command and verify your story?" Desmond took a slow breath. "This is out of control," but he nodded. "I'd prefer you call the Naval Special Warfare Center if you want confirmation. Or Naval Base Coronado's main desk. They can confirm my status." Miller let out a short laugh, dripping with condescension. "Don't worry, I plan to. Then we'll see what they have to say about their so-called SEAL." While the second officer went to the cruiser to track down the number for Naval Special Warfare, Officer Miller continued to loom in front of Desmond. "You know," he started, "I've seen all sorts pass through here. Folks like you think you can do whatever you want because you wear a uniform. Doesn't mean you're above the law." Desmond locked eyes with him, carefully controlling his voice. "I'm not above the law, Officer Miller, but I am abiding by it. If there's something you think I did wrong, I'd appreciate you telling me." Miller's eyes flashed, as though not expecting a calm rebuttal. "You watch your tone. I can haul you in for obstruction if I feel like it." Desmond steadied himself. He had faced warlords and insurgents. He had endured the brutality of Bud S and multiple combat tours. He was not easily intimidated. Yet he also understood that one bullet or a single misinterpretation could end his life on this highway. Just then, the younger officer jogged back from the cruiser, his face a mixture of confusion and sudden respect. He handed the phone to Miller, who placed it to his ear. For a brief moment, Miller listened, brow furrowing deeper by the second. Then he asked curt questions, tone significantly more controlled. "Yes, that's correct. So you can vouch for him?" Yes. "Yeah, all right. Thank you." The officer ended the call. He stood silent for a beat, refusing to meet Desmond's eyes. Then, with a visible scowl, he handed Desmond back his documents. "Looks like you check out," Miller muttered. Desmond noticed the subtle tremble in the officer's voice, like a man forced to backtrack his arrogance. "Can I go now, officer?" Miller hesitated, glancing at the younger officer, who merely shrugged. Finally, Miller relented. Yeah, you can go, but watch yourself. Desmond inhaled, channeling the simmering frustration out of his body. He placed his documents inside the car. As he was about to enter the driver's seat, he felt a rush of defiance, a sense that letting Miller's transgression slide without so much as a word would reinforce that this kind of behavior was acceptable. He turned back to face the officer. "Just so you know, Officer Miller, I've served this country in multiple combat zones. I've risked my life to protect the rights we all enjoy. That includes your right to treat me like this. I hope someday you'll think twice before assuming the worst about someone who looks like me." Miller, momentarily taken aback, opened and closed his mouth, as though searching for a retort. But he said nothing. Desmond slid into his car and drove off, adrenaline still coursing. He glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing Miller and the younger officer standing in the dust, gazing after him in stony silence. Little did they all realize, this encounter was far from over. Desmond tried to shake off the incident, chalking it up as another unfortunate brush with prejudice. He had bigger things on his mind, his looming deployment, the well-being of his family, and the brotherhood of SEALs he was leaving behind on the West Coast for a brief respite. But fate had other plans. Unbeknownst to him, a bystander in a passing vehicle had recorded the tail end of the encounter on their phone. The partial clip went up on social media that very evening. Though it didn't capture the entire stop, it showed Desmond politely trying to reason with an irate Officer Miller. The video concluded with Desmond's stoic words about serving his country, which struck a chord with viewers. Within days, the clip went viral. News outlets picked up the story of a decorated Navy SEAL apparently being harassed by law enforcement. Names weren't initially clear, but local activists identified Officer Brad Miller from the county sheriff's department. Discussions ignited across social media. Some people demanded accountability. Others insisted that the clip had to be missing context, while still others recognized a pattern of racially biased policing. Desmond, busy visiting family and preparing to continue his drive, didn't even know he was at the center of an internet firestorm. It wasn't until Troy Caldwell, his friend in Memphis, called him that he got the news. "Man, you're all over Twitter and Facebook. People are talking about some run-in with a cop. That was you, wasn't it?" Troy's voice teemed with concern. Desmond sighed. "Yeah, but I didn't realize anyone was filming." The significance of the moment began to dawn on him. Over the years, countless people of color had experiences with law enforcement that went unrecorded or unacknowledged. Now, for better or worse, his story was front and center. That night, Desmond was checking into a modest motel to get some rest. He caught a local news broadcast, and there it was, a segment featuring his partial story. An older news anchor with a stern expression announced, "A local sheriff's deputy is under investigation after a viral video emerged of a traffic stop involving a U.S. Navy SEAL." Desmond watched with a strange sense of detachment. The clip played, but the newscast still had minimal details. They didn't mention his name, only that the Navy had apparently confirmed the motorist was an active duty SEAL. The sheriff's department had issued a statement that it was launching an internal review. "Guess they have no choice," Desmond murmured to himself. He felt uneasy being in a spotlight he never asked for. He had gone his entire career trying to serve honorably in the shadows, the way SEALs often do. Almost on cue, his phone began to ring incessantly, with numbers he didn't recognize, likely reporters seeking comment. He turned the phone off and left it on the nightstand. In the quiet of the motel room, he stared at the ceiling, replaying the traffic stop in his mind. He remembered how his heart had pounded with the possibility that a single misstep could cost him his life. For all his advanced training, for all the mortal dangers he had faced, it was humiliating to think his biggest risk on American soil might stem from the color of his skin and a cop's preconceptions. The next morning, he drove to Troy's place in Memphis. Troy lived in a small house near the outskirts of the city with a backyard that overlooked a wooded area. He had a limp from the injury that got him medically discharged from the SEALs, but his spirit remained as strong as ever. Troy greeted Desmond with a bear hug. "Man, you look like you've been through a war zone. Sit down, catch your breath." Inside, Troy's living room was adorned with Navy memorabilia, framed pictures of their Bud S-class, a plaque commemorating Troy's time of service, and a well-worn American flag folded neatly in a display case. Before Desmond could say much, Troy's phone started buzzing. Troy checked the screen and groaned. "That's another reporter. I've been fielding calls all day. People want to know how legit you are, what rank you hold, all kinds of nonsense." Desmond rubbed his eyes. "I don't want any of this. All I did was get pulled over." Troy shrugged. "Well, apparently the world wants to make an example out of that officer. There's talk of a deeper pattern of discrimination in that department." Desmond sighed. "I never wanted to be a poster child for racism in policing, but if the shoe fits." Troy nodded. "Yeah, but you know, sometimes these situations choose you. Doesn't matter if you like it or not." That afternoon, they sat at Troy's dining table, taking calls from Navy buddies who voiced their support. Even Captain Anderson from Naval Base Coronado, the officer who oversaw training programs, left a voicemail praising Desmond's composure during the stop. It seemed that the brotherhood he'd cultivated in the teams extended into civilian life, and they had his back. While Desmond gathered with allies, events in the small Midwestern county where the stop occurred took a tumultuous turn. Local activists demanded accountability, picketing the sheriff's department with signs reading "End racial profiling and justice for our SEAL." Media trucks swarmed the parking lot, hungry for updates. Officer Miller had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Rumors circulated that he had a history of questionable stops and complaints filed by minority drivers. Nothing had stuck before because there wasn't any high-profile coverage. But this time, the story was too big to ignore. Miller found himself in an unaccustomed spotlight. Neighbors who once waved to him in the morning now regarded him with suspicious eyes. The sheriff's department was under pressure to show that they took the matter seriously, and everyone from the county commissioner to the town mayor was issuing statements about fair policing standards. As days passed, more details emerged about Miller's checkered past: excessive force complaints, a pattern of pulling over out of state plates belonging to black drivers, and a general record of intimidation. None of these complaints had ever escalated to a formal charge until now. One evening, Desmond was sipping coffee on Troy's porch, trying to figure out how to handle the deluge of attention. He was tempted to disappear, just get in his car and keep driving, ignoring the phone calls. Yet, part of him felt a responsibility to speak. He decided to call a lawyer friend, Morgan Sanders, who had handled cases for veterans. They discussed the possibility of filing a formal complaint or even a civil rights lawsuit. But Desmond wasn't out for money or revenge. All he wanted was to ensure no one else suffered this humiliating experience. Morgan had another idea. What if you just go on record, give a statement to the local press about what happened and why it matters that people pay attention? It doesn't have to be sensational. Just your honest account. Desmond realized the wisdom in that. If he refused to speak, the narrative would spiral out of control, shaped by rumor and speculation. So he agreed. The following morning, he stood in front of a row of cameras in Memphis, with Troy by his side, reading from a short, prepared statement. He recounted the facts of the stop, the aggression from Officer Miller, the thorough search of his car, and how he complied with every lawful instruction. He concluded with a measured tone, "I love this country, and I've devoted my life to serving it. But for too long, people who look like me have been subject to suspicion rather than trust. This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that every American can travel freely without fear of bias or injustice. I'm calling on the Sheriff's Department to undertake meaningful reforms. We all deserve better. His words reverberated across social media. He received overwhelming support from veterans, civil rights activists, and everyday citizens who sympathized with his ordeal. In the weeks that followed, the Sheriff's Department concluded its internal investigation. The findings were damning. Officer Miller had engaged in a pattern of racial profiling. Several minority drivers came forward to recount eerily similar experiences being pulled over without cause, searched, and demeaned. The pressure from the public and local government became insurmountable. Miller was fired. Prosecutors even contemplated whether to file charges for civil rights violations. Though no definitive decision had been reached, the mere possibility of legal action weighed heavily on him. Journalists swarmed him at his home. Miller's wife left town with their kids to stay with relatives, trying to escape the relentless scrutiny. It seemed that all the power he'd flaunted during that fateful stop was now turned against him. The same system he once manipulated to harass others was now dissecting his every move. One evening, after a particularly brutal onslaught of media coverage, a local reporter cornered him in a grocery store parking lot. "Officer Miller, any comment on the allegations of racial profiling and harassment? Why did you target a decorated Navy SEAL?" Miller, eyes rimmed red with exhaustion, mumbled something about fake news and hurried away, groceries forgotten. Neighbors whispered, some pitying him, others outraged. Regardless of where they stood, everyone recognized that Miller's career in law enforcement was finished. Despite everything, Desmond struggled with conflicting emotions. A part of him felt relief that this man, who had wronged him, was finally facing accountability. Another part grieved the ugliness that had to happen for this conversation to come to the forefront. Desmond's father always taught him that justice should aim to mend, not just punish. So Desmond, in an unexpected move, reached out through the Sheriff's Department to request a private conversation with Miller, if Miller was willing. He wasn't sure what compelled him to do it. Maybe he wanted closure. Maybe he wanted to see if there was a chance for genuine repentance and growth. It took a couple of days, but eventually Miller agreed. The meeting took place in a neutral setting, a conference room in the county courthouse. No reporters, no cameras, just a representative from the department, Desmond, and Miller himself. When Desmond walked in, he was struck by how different Miller looked: pale, subdued, shoulders slumped. The confident arrogance he'd displayed on the highway was absent. They sat across from each other at a plain wooden table. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Desmond cleared his throat. "I asked to meet you because I'm not here to gloat. I just want to understand why you did what you did." Miller lowered his gaze. He looked conflicted, perhaps torn between pride and guilt. Slowly, he shook his head. "I don't know. I can't say there was a good reason. Some of it was how I grew up, the attitudes I was taught. Some of it was stress. Maybe I just let the power go to my head." Desmond considered his words. "You know, I didn't want any of this attention. I just wanted to drive in peace. But you made an assumption the moment you saw me, because of the color of my skin." Miller's jaw tightened and he forced himself to nod. "I know. And I'm sorry. It wasn't a dramatic outpouring of tears or a stirring confession." But Desmond could see sincerity in the man's eyes. Whether it was remorse for his situation or genuine regret for his actions, Desmond couldn't fully tell. But it was something. Desmond responded quietly. "I accept your apology. I don't hate you. I hate what you did." When they stood to leave, they exchanged a perfunctory handshake, an uneasy gesture of civility between two men who had played radically different roles in each other's lives. Desmond continued on to Chesapeake to see his family. Amid the laughter and hugs, his parents remarked on how he seemed weighed down. He told them about the incident, the viral video, and the uproar that had followed. His mother's face tightened with worry, while his father put a hand on his shoulder, murmuring, "I'm proud of you for standing tall." In the following weeks, local and national organizations reached out to Desmond, hoping to invite him to speak about racial profiling, justice, and the role of the military in bridging divides. At first, he was hesitant. He was a SEAL, trained to operate in shadows, not on podiums. But after careful thought, he decided he could use his experiences to spark meaningful dialogue. He spoke at a small event hosted by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, in Tennessee, sharing his story with candor. He reminded the audience that real change occurs when people refuse to remain silent. He also emphasized that not all law enforcement officers were the same, that many stood for justice and fairness. Meanwhile, the FBI opened an inquiry into patterns of misconduct at the county sheriff's department. With multiple testimonies piling up, the department faced an uncertain future. The sheriff eventually resigned, replaced by a new leader promising sweeping reforms and more rigorous anti-bias training. Eventually, Desmond made it back to Naval Base Coronado. His fellow SEALs teased him about becoming a celebrity. Some half-jokingly asked for autographs, while others simply patted his back and told him they had his six. Captain Anderson called him into his office. The senior officer listened patiently as Desmond recounted the story in detail, from the humiliating roadside search to the media uproar. When Desmond finished, Captain Anderson said, "I'm sorry this happened to you, Chief Walker, and I'm proud of the way you handled it. Your composure and dignity reflected the best of our values." Desmond felt a wave of relief. It meant everything to him that the Navy, his second family, had his back. Days blended into a routine of training, briefings, and physical conditioning, preparing for whatever mission lay ahead. Yet a subtle transformation had taken root in Desmond. He no longer just saw himself as a warrior on the battlefield, but as a voice, a living testament to the ongoing struggle for equality. Months passed. The story, once a blazing headline, settled into memory. The world, always hungry for fresh controversies, moved on to other topics. Yet Desmond's personal life continued to bear the fruit of that fateful encounter. He began mentoring younger sailors and Marines who faced discrimination or self-doubt. They gravitated to him, recognizing in his story a template for resilience. He also started building bonds with local police departments near the base, offering training sessions on cultural awareness and the psychological interplay between suspicion and respect, informal talks that resonated more powerfully because they came from a man who understood both the burdens of service and the sting of prejudice. In one such workshop, an older police sergeant approached him privately. "Look, I'll be honest. I've had my own set ways for a long time, but hearing your perspective made me realize how it feels on the other side of the badge. I'm going to pass this on to the guys in my precinct." That gesture, so simple yet so profound, underscored the possibility of bridging divides when people genuinely listened. On a bright afternoon, Desmond found himself once again on a highway, heading to a small weekend retreat in the hills outside San Diego. He reflected on how life had changed since that day he'd been pulled over. The rage had subsided, replaced by a nuanced understanding that transformation is often painful. If the incident and its aftermath compelled at least some people to confront their biases, it might prove a worthy battle in its own right. As he drove, he recalled a memory from his SEAL training, an instructor yelling at them in the surf, "Pain is just weakness leaving the body." That phrase had kept them pushing through numb limbs and exhaustion. Now he saw it as a metaphor for social progress. Perhaps the collective pain stirred by injustice was a necessary jolt, a sign that weakness in the form of prejudice was being forced out. He parked at a lookout point with a panoramic view of the Pacific. The ocean stretched wide, shimmering under the late afternoon sun. He watched as waves curled and broke, unrelenting and pure. A sense of calm washed over him, reminiscent of those times he'd triumphed over the pounding surf in Coronado. In that moment, Desmond whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for life, for the chance to make a difference, and for the redemption that sometimes follows in the wake of life's storms. He thought about the officer who had tried to degrade him, now facing the repercussions of his actions. He reflected on how justice, in its slow and winding course, had arrived in an unlikely package. The wind whipped around him, carrying the faint brine of salt water, and in that swirl of sun and breeze, Desmond Walker, Navy SEAL, warrior, accidental advocate, felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would always be ready, not just for physical battles on foreign shores, but for the fights that still needed waging at home, for the sake of everyone who believed in a fair and united future. He nodded to himself, took a final breath of the ocean air, and then turned back to his car. Tomorrow, there would be more training, more commitments, and perhaps more challenges. But for now, he could relish this small victory, one that proved that sometimes the darkest highways could lead to unexpected light. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey of honor, courage, and redemption. Desmond Walker's story reminds us that even in our most challenging moments, dignity and resolve can pave the way for profound change. A single encounter on a dusty highway revealed an entire system of prejudice and ignited a rallying cry for justice. In the aftermath, our hero learned that fighting for what's right doesn't always involve weapons and camouflage. It can also mean bearing witness, using your voice, and standing firm in your convictions. If you found this story inspiring and uplifting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales. Share this story with friends and family who appreciate real-life drama, unexpected heroes, and the unbreakable spirit of those who defend our freedoms. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and champion hope for a better tomorrow.